topic for today, which is partnering up for sustainable and just cities, local governments, and community-led initiatives. Now, this is part of the Urban Community Project for Sustainable and Just Cities with the support of the Robert Bosch Foundation, which we're really happy about. They didn't pay me to say that. We actually really do enjoy working with them and making this possible. And the first question I wanted to answer is, how did we land on this topic specifically? We have, over the past year, run a program where we have given small grants to 9 different community-led initiatives. Well, those 7 were from communities and 2 are actually very locally rooted municipality-led initiatives, but they were all focused on sustainable and just cities. And you can see some of the pictures here. We have a skill sharing workshop. We have a public space design initiative. We've got a cargo bike that pops up with climate change information, and we've got a food sharing initiative and urban gardens and so on. So really quite broad. And we did a lot of workshops and had exchange amongst each other. And then we got towards the end of our time together, of the year together, and Lucia and I were thinking, as well as Adrian, were thinking, okay, how do we move forward? How do we make sure that these initiatives that are having amazing impacts can continue to be supported in the more longer term and build connections where they are? And so we landed on this idea of connections between the community-led initiatives themselves and the municipalities that they're in. And Lucia will go into more detail about why we think this is important in just a moment, but this is how we landed on the topic in the first place. And so then we had some conversations about it with our, we call them experimenters, but these initiatives that we were working with, and had a small workshop on it as well. So everything that you're hearing today is really coming from people who are working on this topic, or well, are working on the ground on sustainable and just cities, and we were listening to their needs, their concerns. And our goal for the near future is to now expand a little bit on this topic and hear more voices, bring more voices in. So I will hand it over. No, first of all, maybe this needs to be clarified about why we're focusing on community-led initiatives specifically, and as opposed to, for example, citizen participation more generally, which is also a very hot topic. And this is because we find that community-led initiatives are very action-oriented. They're organized already, and they're implementing change on the ground. And they have a lot of potential to reach people, to have a bigger impact because they're already ready to go, basically. They just need more support. And we've defined them as, yes, a broad range of organized and unorganized groups, could be informal groups as well, that are working on place-specific experiences. And what's important to us is that the community-led initiatives that we're working with, that we're looking at, have these clear set of values that are oriented towards justice as well as sustainability, obviously. Okay, so then Lucia can get more into why we think that this collaboration is important. Lucia, over to you.
Thank you, Sophia. Yeah, so I think building on what you were saying now, that what we find so attractive of the role of community-led initiatives in cities is this, while we recognize the importance of all kinds of social movements, but this kind of community-led initiatives that we focus on is this kind of contribution that they have in terms of taking actual real action. And while we don't want to definitely argue or advocate that local governments delegate or exploit community-led initiatives to do the work of the just environmental transition, because this is not of the ecological transition, because this is obviously something that local governments and governments in general have the power for the systemic change that it's needed. Still, community-led initiatives in cities have the local knowledge, understand very well their context. They're very much linked to also marginalized communities on the ground. And therefore, they have this superpower in a way that has nothing to do with money or capital. But it's, yeah, the superpower of the local knowledge of being connected to the ground and understanding the context. And in this sense, local governments and community-led initiatives together can bring both of them, their strengths, and help the transition of that happens at the small scale. Again, without that, it's not our intention to argue that it's the work of the transition should be on these smaller initiatives. There is so much bigger structural changes when it comes, for instance, to energy systems or roads, infrastructures, and housing, that it's really only governments that can do. But in terms of creating the culture on the local level, community-led initiatives have this superpower, and therefore we advocate for local governments to support them. Of course, some other pro points here, advantages that we always kind of highlight is that this way trust is built when there is direct connections between local governments and community initiatives, and that also community-led initiatives are very resourceful for local governments in the sense that they have this more freedom to sparkle social innovation. For instance, they have this independency also to act, and that can inspire local governments too. And then yeah, it does go also in the direction of including more diversity and going towards this objective of leaving no one behind. So these are some of the points that we highlight the most. Sophia, back to you.
Thank you. I can't help but feel like we're weather reporters when we say back to you. But that's great. And the images that you see are also images that have been shared with us from the community initiatives that we've been working with. Good. So the next one is, what challenges exist for such collaboration, for linking these two different types of actors? Yeah, it's not always easy. Actually, we have had many groups who have said it would be great to work together with their local government, but we've also had some who've said, you know, the local government is a very hostile actor. We can't imagine working together with them. And so it's we thought it was important to be really explicit about what some of the challenges might be for collaboration. And Lucia mentioned the word trust in the last slide about being a major benefit of if there is collaboration. But this also is a bit of a double-edged sword. It could act as a barrier if there is a lack of trust from both sides towards the other actor, then it will be fairly difficult to collaborate, obviously. And this is quite a big key term that we've heard over and over and over again. So maybe it's something we want to talk about later altogether as well. And of course, this concept of long-term engagement has been a challenge because much of the engagement that we've learned about has been relatively short-term. So it's based on projects, for example, or short-term initiatives, but not really building up this culture of longer-term meaningful interaction. And then secondly, we have found that there is just a lack of physical spaces and also more systematic processes for collaboration, for bringing these two different groups together. Instead, what has been more focused, what has been more in focus has been, as I mentioned, projects, more one-off projects, and on individual connections, but not really baked into the system. And then finally, we identified so many different challenges, but these are just a few of them. But I did want to throw this last bullet point in here because it looks at perhaps what is a root cause of a lack of collaboration between local governments and community-led initiatives. And it's actually the disincentive for civic activism that is brought forth by a capitalist economic system, which does not provide monetary value for this sort of engagement, or usually does not, and then also is often causing people to be overworked, to be maybe burnt out, and not have time to do this sort of unpaid engagement activities, no matter how important. So that was an interesting one that we have learned as well from our communities. And then to Lucia for the last slide on what is currently happening.
Yeah, so I guess there's so much that can be done to make the collaboration between local governments and community-led initiatives more fruitful. But at the end of the day, if we want to really keep it realistic, one thing that we found that is very important is money. Community-led initiatives also, even if they do this on the side from their jobs, or if they do it, also somewhat on a voluntary basis, and even they don't want to be paid for their work, which is again not the case for everyone, but even in that case, still community-led initiatives do to implement some sort of action, they will almost always need money. And but money in itself is not enough. It's also the way in which this money is granted, right? So I think if we have people here that volunteer in some community-led initiatives or just work in universities, anyways, I think more or less here we all know the logic of public fundings, private fundings, or fundings through different sources, and how restricted it can be, how the problem that, for instance, is short-term. There is, or that the KPI and the reporting are very strict and not really helpful, and that people have to spend a necessary amount of time in reporting things that are really that helpful for the initiative in itself, like the final goal of creating sustainable and just cities. So when it comes to how collaboration is already happening or how it can be created most successfully, we one of our major points is simple and long-term funding streams. And simple is very important here. And maybe, we will have the opportunity to get back a little bit more into it, because Sophia and I are also working now on a guide focusing exactly specifically on this, because we had the experience as intermediate between the Bosch Foundation and these communities. Because the foundation, the way it works is difficult, legally speaking, for the foundation to fund these communities directly. So we had this intermediate job, and we enjoyed it very much. But thanks to doing this, like, we learned a lot, and in terms of how funding can be made more simple. So just stay tuned, because we are going to share this guide very soon based on our experience and based on the direct and very honest feedback of our communities. And then there are some maybe a little bit more simple, straightforward things that can be done to boost the collaboration between community-led initiatives and local governments. And one is transparency and accessibility. So for instance, if local governments can make it very clear on their website how communities can reach local governments, to where are the spaces, who are the people that really like you have to get in touch with. And then we also think it's great that local governments do have this one-on-one connection with community-led initiatives, but at the same time also facilitate the connection between the different communities themselves, and provide, again, the space and the resources for them to stay in touch. And this connection should be kind of constant or sustainable in some ways, and not just depend on short funding streams or just based on personal connections. And that's why here I wrote make it personal, but not only, because on the one hand, the personal connections between people, so actually the humans working in the local governments and the people in community-led initiatives, are very important to create the connection between the institutions and the community. At the same time, it should not only be based on this one person in the local government that is directly connected to people active in communities, because what happens when this person leaves, the whole thing kind of, is based on a quite weak basis.
All right, thanks, Lucia. And maybe one spontaneous example that just came into my mind from this make it personal point was actually from the garden example in Budapest. And I saw that we have someone here who's from Budapest. So in this case, they were making a garden plot out of a unused bit of land that was owned by someone, but unused and abandoned. So they turned it into a wonderful garden. They had many different workshops there, welcomed refugees to come and get involved, and just became a real community space. And actually, a lot of people who were coming to use this space were people either who were working at the municipality or local police officers and so on. And then because of these connections, on a very personal level, this garden spot or informal garden spot will now in the future be turned into a park. It was rezoned that the person who sold it had to turn it into actually a public park. And so this was one example of how very personal connections helped create a more stable initiative in the long run, hopefully. Let's see how it goes. But on the one hand, that was actually, on the other hand, that was more up to chance. So how to have the best of both worlds is an interesting question, I think. So to wrap it up from our side, we have compiled many of our insights into a booklet on the topic. So basically the headlines we've given you today, but there's some more details in this booklet that we've put out as well as a podcast episode that I recorded with the City Council in Cork.